Welcome to my channel, Glorious English. Imagine a boy born in a tiny log cabin, cold and quiet, who grew up to face a nation on the edge of collapse. He walked barefoot to borrow books, lost his mother too soon, and struggled with poverty. Yet he dared to dream bigger than anyone could imagine. He faced enemies, betrayal, and choices that could destroy him, but he stayed honest and kind. What he did next changed history forever. This is the shocking and inspiring true story of Abraham Lincoln, the man who saved a nation and left lessons that still guide the world. Chapter 1. The night the baby arrived in a log cabin on a cold February night in 1809 in the quiet forests of Kentucky, a tiny log cabin stood under a sky full of stars. Inside that cabin, a young mother named Nancy Hanks Lincoln held a newborn baby boy in her arms. The room was small, with only a wooden chair, a simple bed, and a fire that cracked softly in the corner. The wind outside whispered through the trees, but inside, everything felt warm and safe. The baby cried loudly at first, but when his father, Thomas Lincoln, wrapped him in a soft homemade blanket, he slowly calmed down. They named him Abraham. The cabin had no floor except packed dirt. When it rained, drops sometimes slipped through small cracks in the roof, so Thomas often put a bucket under the leak. But the little family did not complain. They were used to simple living, and they believed that love was more important than comfort. That night, Abraham's sister, Sarah, who was only 2 years old, tiptoed toward the bed. She looked at her baby brother with wide eyes and whispered, "I will take care of him." Outside the cabin, the forest was alive with small sounds. An owl hooted from a faraway tree. A horse tied near the cabin stomped its feet gently. A neighbor walked through the snow to check on the family, carrying a small pot of warm soup. He knocked softly and asked, "Is everything all right?" Thomas smiled proudly and said, "Yes, we have a new son." Life in the forest was not easy, and Abraham's parents knew this child would grow up in a world full of hard work. But they also felt something special. That night, Nancy looked at her son's tiny hands and said softly, "Maybe one day he will do something important." It was not a prediction or a dream, just a quiet feeling in a mother's heart. As the night grew darker, a log in the fire popped loudly, waking the baby again. Thomas rocked him gently and hummed a simple tune. The firelight danced on the cabin walls, making soft shadows that moved like little stories. The warm glow touched the baby's face, and he blinked slowly, almost curious about the world he had just entered. Later, when the family finally slept, the snow outside stopped falling. A thin moon moved behind the clouds, shining lightly over the forest. No one in that small cabin knew that this newborn boy would one day guide a divided nation, speak words that would echo across history, and become one of the most remembered leaders of all time. But for now, he was simply a child sleeping in a tiny wooden home, surrounded by the woods, by love, and by a world that was quietly shaping his future. This is how Abraham Lincoln's story began. Not in a palace or a large home, but in a humble cabin, where every small moment slowly built the foundation of a remarkable life. Chapter 2. The Boy Who Refused to Stay Silent. Abraham Lincoln grew up in a world where books were rare treasures, and silence was expected from children. But little Abraham was not made for silence. He had questions inside him that burned like small fires. When he watched grown-ups argue, he wondered why they could not settle things with fairness. When he saw someone being cheated at the market, he asked himself why truth was treated so lightly. These early thoughts made him different from many children around him. He wanted to understand the world, not just live in it. His father, Thomas Lincoln, was a hard-working man who believed in discipline more than dreaming. He wanted his son to be strong and silent, focused only on farm work. But Abraham was drawn to stories more than soil. Every time he found a book, he held it like a precious jewel. He would read under the dim firelight while the rest of the family slept. His mother, Nancy, quietly admired his hunger for knowledge. She often said, "Abe, if you keep feeding your mind, it will take you far from this cabin." Her gentle support became a small light in the darkness of his difficult childhood. But life tested him early. At the age of 9, Abraham lost his mother to a sudden illness. Her death shook him to his core. But it did something else too. It strengthened his desire to rise above the limits of his world. He began reading even more, trying to fill the empty space she left behind. When his father remarried and brought home Sarah Bush Johnston, Abraham found an unexpected gift. Sarah saw his potential immediately and protected his love for learning. She gave him books, encouraged him to ask questions, and treated him like a child meant for something greater. She later said, "Abe was the best boy I ever saw." Growing up in frontier life was not easy. Abraham worked long hours, cutting trees, building fences, plowing fields. But his mind never stopped searching. He listened to travelers, absorbed their stories, and widened his understanding of the world. By the time he became a teenager, he had already developed a powerful sense of justice. Whenever someone tried to bully or cheat a neighbor, Abraham stepped in. People noticed the tall, shy young man who loved fairness more than comfort. This reputation followed him through the woods, across the fields, and into every small town he visited. It was clear, even then, that Abraham Lincoln would never stay silent when something was wrong. Chapter 3. Loss, Change, and a New Mother. With a warm smile, the forest around the Lincoln home was quiet. But inside the log cabin, young Abraham felt a heavy sadness growing day by day. His mother, Nancy, had always been gentle. She sang soft songs while cooking, touched his hair when he studied, and told him, "Always be kind, Abe." But one autumn, she fell sick. The illness spread quickly in the little countryside. Many families suffered, and sadly, she became too weak to stand. Abraham brought her water, held her hand, and sat beside her every moment he could. One morning, she whispered, "Be good to your sister. Help your father." Then she closed her eyes forever. The cabin felt empty. The evenings became quiet without her soft voice. Abraham, still a child, helped his father cut wood, cook simple meals, and take care of little Sarah. But inside, he missed his mother every single day. He sometimes walked into the woods alone, sat on a fallen tree, and looked up at the sky. The trees swayed gently, and he felt as if nature was listening to his sadness. Even though he was young, he learned how quickly life could change. Winter arrived early that year. The cold winds pushed through the cracks in the cabin walls. Abraham and Sarah wrapped themselves in blankets, while their father, Thomas, tried his best to keep the home warm. Thomas realized the children needed a mother's care. One morning, he said, "Children, I am going to bring someone who will help us." He traveled many miles to bring back his old friend, a widow named Sarah Bush Johnston. Days passed. Then, one afternoon, Abraham heard footsteps outside. He opened the door and saw a woman standing there with a bright smile, gentle eyes, and 3 children beside her. She placed her hand lovingly on Abraham's cheek and said, "I am here now. Everything will be fine." That single moment changed his heart. Her kindness filled the cabin like sunshine after long rain. This new mother brought warm blankets, dishes, clothes, and a cheerful voice. She cleaned the cabin, cooked warm food, and made every child feel safe. She treated Abraham the same as her own children. She noticed how much he loved books and encouraged him. "Read, Abe," she said. "Learn as much as you can. Your mind is strong." Her words gave him comfort he had missed for so long. Slowly, laughter returned to the cabin. Abraham began helping with chores again, but now with a lighter heart. He carried buckets of water, gathered firewood, and sometimes made the little children laugh by making funny faces. His stepmother often watched him and whispered proudly, "This boy will go far." In the evenings, she told stories by the fire. Abraham listened carefully, sometimes asking questions, sometimes smiling softly at the warm light. The whole cabin, once filled with sadness, now felt like a home again. Though he never forgot his birth mother, he found new strength through the gentle care of his stepmother. This chapter of Abraham's life taught him something important. that even after deep loss, kindness can help heal the heart. And slowly, the boy who once cried alone in the woods began to walk with hope again, ready for the next years that would shape his character. Chapter 4. Growing tall, strong, and kind in the wild woods. As Abraham grew older, the small log cabin and wild woods around it became his playground, school, and workshop. He had broad shoulders and long arms from chopping wood every morning before breakfast. His father gave him the first small axe, and Abraham learned to swing it carefully, splitting logs for fire. Every morning, the sun peeked over the hills, and the sound of wood hitting the ground echoed through the forest. Even while working hard, young Abraham never ignored people around him. If a neighbor's fence had fallen, he would help rebuild it. If a mother needed firewood for her children, he would carry extra, sometimes walking miles to deliver it. One winter, when the snow was thick and bitter, Abraham saw a small boy shivering by the roadside. He gave him his own coat and walked him safely to the nearest cabin. That small act of kindness became part of his growing reputation. He was strong, yes, but also gentle. At school, lessons were short and books rare. But Abraham found knowledge in the forest, in conversations with passing travelers, and in listening to older people tell stories by the fireplace. They told him about fairness, courage, and honesty. He remembered each story as if it were a lantern lighting his mind. Once, a man lost a few coins while passing through the village. Abraham picked them up and ran after the man, returning the money before the sun went down. Everyone noticed. Honest as Abraham Lincoln, they said quietly. He loved challenges. One summer, he built a small raft with logs, ropes, and a wooden paddle. He floated it down the river, feeling the cold splash on his face, learning patience and balance. Another day, he helped herd sheep, protecting them from wolves, and learned responsibility and care. Abraham did not have toys like other children, but he created his own games with sticks, stones, and imagination. Each small task, each little story, each tiny act of kindness shaped him. Even in play, Abraham thought of others. If a friend fell, he helped him up. If someone was hungry, he shared his meal. His days were long, filled with work and small joys, yet he never complained. The woods were quiet, but his heart was loud with ideas, dreams, and hope. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, he would sit on a small log and look at the sky, imagining a world where people were fair, kind, and honest. Little did anyone know, the boy growing in those woods would one day lead a nation and touch millions of lives with the same honesty and care he showed in every small act. Chapter 5. The Young Clerk Who Told Stories After Sunset. As Abraham grew taller and stronger, He also grew curious about the world beyond the woods. Books were rare, but stories were everywhere. From travelers, neighbors, and shopkeepers, he loved listening to every tale, especially the ones about brave men, honest leaders, and people who helped others. He would often retell these stories to friends and family, adding his own thoughts and small jokes. His storytelling made people laugh, think, and sometimes even cry. When he was a teenager, Abraham found a small job in a village shop. The store was simple, shelves stacked with flour, sugar, and cloth. He worked long hours, counting coins, cleaning floors, and helping customers. Some days, he walked miles to deliver goods to faraway farms. Though tired, he never lost his smile. In the evenings, after the shop closed, Abraham would sit by the fireplace or under the stars and tell stories to anyone who wanted to listen. Children would gather around him, eyes wide, imagining the adventures he described. Adults would stay longer than needed, enjoying his quiet humor and sharp observations. One evening, a small boy came to the shop, frightened and hungry. Abraham offered him bread and listened carefully as the boy spoke about losing his home in a storm. Abraham comforted him, showing the boy how to fix small things and where to find help. That night, the boy returned home with hope, and Abraham felt a strange warmth in his chest. It was the feeling of helping another soul. The first time he understood how small acts could ripple into big changes. Even at work, he learned patience and honesty. Once, a customer gave extra coins by mistake. Abraham ran after him for a mile across muddy roads to return the money. The man was amazed. "You are honest," he said. Abraham only smiled. In small ways, he built trust, showing that kindness and integrity mattered more than money or fame. He also read whenever he could, borrowed books, letters, and old newspapers became his teachers. He copied words, learned new ideas, and practiced speaking clearly, all while doing chores in the shop. By sunset, when the shop closed, Abraham would light a small lantern and continue reading or telling stories. He imagined himself one day helping more people, not just in his village, but in a larger world. Each story he shared, each act of honesty, and each evening spent under the stars planted seeds of leadership, courage, and wisdom. Little did anyone know that the boy who told stories after sunset would one day lead a nation, guide millions, and use the lessons learned in a simple village shop to shape history. Chapter 6. The First Step into Law and Public Service. As Abraham grew older, he felt a strong pull toward helping people in ways bigger than stories or small acts in the village. He wanted to solve problems, guide people fairly, and speak for those who had no voice. Books had taught him much, but real life taught him more. One day, he found a small law office in a nearby town. The office was quiet, With high shelves full of dusty books, Abraham asked if he could help, and the lawyer, seeing the boy's eagerness, agreed. He started with small jobs, carrying papers, making copies, and observing the lawyer as he spoke to clients. Each day was a lesson. Abraham learned how people came with problems, disputes over land, arguments about debts, and misunderstandings that could destroy families. He listened carefully, watching the lawyer take notes and speak kindly but firmly. Slowly, he learned the rules of fairness, patience, and the power of words. One morning, a farmer came rushing in, worried that his neighbor would take his only cow. Abraham helped calm the man, writing down details for the lawyer. That day, he realized how important small actions could be in saving livelihoods. At night, Abraham studied by candlelight. He memorized laws, wrote summaries, and practiced speaking. He often walked long miles between towns, delivering letters, meeting clients, and observing town meetings. During these walks, he noticed things most adults ignored. A child left alone in a field, a family arguing quietly over food, or neighbors helping each other rebuild after a storm. Each observation shaped his mind and heart, teaching him that fairness and compassion must go together. As he gained confidence, people began asking for his help. He assisted in small disputes, explained rules, and never charged those who could not pay. Stories of the young man who walked miles to return a lost coin, or who stayed late to help a family solve a fight, spread quietly through towns. Slowly, Abraham built a reputation, not yet as a politician, but as a young man with honesty, skill, and a heart for people. He also began writing letters to local newspapers, offering thoughts on justice, equality, and responsibility. People were surprised that someone so young spoke with such clarity. Teachers, merchants, and neighbors began seeking his advice. Abraham realized that words, carefully chosen and spoken with respect, could change minds and lives. He decided to become a lawyer formally, studying law without a classroom, learning from books and experience. Each case he touched, each person he helped, prepared him for a larger journey. The path from a humble village boy to a man who would one day guide a nation through its greatest challenges. By the end of this chapter, young Abraham stood at the threshold of something greater. The lessons learned in dusty offices, long walks, and small disputes were laying the foundation for honesty, courage, and wisdom that would define his life. His heart, sharp mind, and simple acts of service were shaping him into a leader the country would one day need. Chapter 7. Love, Letters, Challenges, and a New Life with Mary. As Abraham Lincoln grew into a young man, his heart felt both ambition and longing. Life had taught him hard lessons: loss, responsibility, and the value of honesty. Yet in the quiet moments, he dreamed of love, companionship, and a home filled with warmth. In 1839, he met Mary Todd, a young woman from a well-known family in Lexington, Kentucky. She was sharp, confident, and full of ideas. Their first meeting was at a small social gathering. Abraham was tall, awkward, and soft-spoken. He spoke carefully, but when he smiled, there was a kindness that made people feel at ease. Mary noticed his gentle humor, his curious mind, and the way he listened to others. At first, they wrote letters to each other. Abraham's letters were simple, yet thoughtful. He often described his long walks through the woods, the towns he visited, or a small act of kindness he witnessed. "I saw a mother helping her child cross the muddy street," he wrote. "It reminded me that every small act matters." Mary responded with her own observations and stories from her family, their hopes, and their dreams. Through these letters, they began to know each other deeply, not just words, but thoughts, fears, and values. Their courtship was not easy. Families worried about differences in background, personality, and ambition. Abraham faced financial struggles and the challenge of building a career while earning respect in law and public life. Mary faced societal expectations and the pressure of a wealthy family wanting her to marry someone with stability. Yet both were drawn to honesty, curiosity, and shared ideals. They often walked together, discussing books, politics, and the vision of a better future. Once, during a long walk in a forest clearing, Abraham pointed to the horizon and said, "One day, I want to make a difference, not just for me, but for everyone around me." Mary smiled, her eyes shining with quiet trust. In 1842, after years of letters, conversations, and small gestures, Abraham and Mary married. The wedding was simple but heartfelt, held with close friends and family. Abraham walked miles to make arrangements himself, ensuring every detail was honest and fair. Their first home was modest. They had little money, but the house was full of warmth. Mary encouraged Abraham's studies, helped him organize his work, and supported his early political dreams. They shared simple moments, walking in the fields, reading by candlelight, and laughing at small jokes. Challenges continued. The couple faced financial worries, long separations due to work, and the pressure of public scrutiny as Abraham's reputation grew. Yet every small act, Mary brewing tea while he studied law, Abraham writing a note of thanks for her support, quiet talks in the evening, built a foundation of love and partnership. These moments, though ordinary, shaped the man who would one day lead a nation. By the end of this chapter, Abraham and Mary's bond had become a source of strength. Through letters, walks, laughter, and quiet support, they learned to face hardships together. This love, humble yet steadfast, would help Abraham endure the trials, decisions, and heavy burdens that awaited him in his journey toward guiding a divided country. Chapter 8. Building a reputation. As Honest Abe, Abraham Lincoln had grown into a young man with strong values. He believed in honesty, fairness, and helping others. People in the villages and towns where he traveled started noticing him. He worked as a lawyer, walking long distances to reach small towns. His clothes were plain, his shoes often worn, but his mind was sharp and his heart kind. Every day, he listened carefully to the problems people brought him. Farmers who had lost their land, merchants who were cheated, or neighbors who argued over small matters. Abraham treated each case seriously. He wrote letters for people who could not read, explained laws in simple words, and sometimes walked miles to return a few coins he found that did not belong to him. One story became famous and helped build his nickname. A man had given Abraham money by mistake. Abraham ran after him for miles until he returned it. People said, "This is the man who will never lie, never cheat. Honest Abe." Children would whisper the story in the streets, and adults would nod with respect. Even rivals in the courtroom could not help but admire his fairness. Abraham believed that every action, no matter how small, built trust. One day, a young clerk asked him, "Sir, why do you care so much for little things?" Abraham smiled and said, "Little things make the big picture. If we are honest in small matters, people will trust us in the big ones." Abraham also began telling stories after long days of work. In the evening, by the light of a lantern, he would gather neighbors and share tales of justice, courage, and humor. People laughed at his jokes, listened to his careful lessons, and began to see him as a man of both mind and heart. These simple gatherings helped him understand people, their fears, their hopes, and their dreams. Every story, every small act, strengthened his bond with the communities he served. Even when traveling, he noticed small moments. A mother helping her child, a neighbor sharing bread with the poor, or a child returning a lost toy. He remembered all of it. These events shaped his beliefs about fairness and compassion. Abraham often wrote notes to himself, reminding himself to stay humble, to walk patiently, and to speak kindly. People began to see him not just as a lawyer, but as a person who could be trusted, a man who kept promises. As his reputation grew, he began to face bigger cases. Sometimes these cases were unfair, confusing, or dangerous. Yet Abraham never changed his habits. He studied carefully, argued honestly, and spoke only what he believed was true. He treated everyone equally, rich or poor, friend or stranger. Slowly, the name Honest Abe spread beyond his small towns. Newspapers printed stories, neighbors told tales, and even children in distant villages learned of the young lawyer who walked miles, returned coins, and treated every person with respect. By the end of this chapter, Abraham's reputation as Honest Abe was not just a name. It was a story of small actions, steady honesty, and kindness that built trust and hope. This trust would later help him guide a nation through some of its hardest times. Every coin returned, every story told, and every small act of honesty had prepared him for the larger journey that awaited. Chapter 9. The Road to Politics. Filled with wins, losses, and lessons. As Abraham Lincoln's reputation as Honest Abe grew, people began encouraging him to enter politics. He believed that fairness and honesty should reach beyond the courtroom to laws that could help everyone. Abraham knew the road would not be easy. He had no money for fancy campaigns, no family connections in politics, and often had to walk miles to meet voters. Yet he believed that truth and hard work could shine brighter than wealth or fame. His first elections were small, but each one taught him lessons. Abraham sometimes lost. People who had connections, money, or better speeches beat him, but each defeat made him stronger. One evening, after losing an election, he sat by the fireplace alone, thinking of every mistake and every small action he could improve. He wrote in his notebook, "I may fail today, but I will learn, and one day, the right words and right actions will matter." These small reflections shaped his approach to leadership. During campaigns, he walked from village to village. He listened more than he spoke. Farmers spoke of poor roads and low prices for crops. Teachers spoke of schools without books. Abraham wrote down each concern, asking questions and showing respect. He told voters stories in simple language, sometimes using humor to explain complex ideas. People loved that he did not pretend to be someone else. They felt that Honest Abe understood their daily struggles. One day, a young man asked him, "Sir, how can you hope to win when your opponents have more money and power?" Abraham smiled and replied, "It is not coins or power that win hearts. It is honesty and care for others that lasts forever." That belief guided every speech, every handshake, and every journey on the rocky roads of Illinois. Abraham also began writing letters to friends and local newspapers, explaining his thoughts simply and clearly. People admired how he could turn a problem into a story with a lesson. Once, after a long speech in a small hall, a woman came to him with tears in her eyes. She said, "I have never felt that someone understands what we go through every day." That moment stayed in Abraham's mind for years. By the time he was elected to the Illinois legislature, Abraham had learned patience, courage, and humility. He knew politics could be harsh, with arguments and misunderstandings, yet he never raised his voice or lied. He believed that listening, learning, and acting fairly would always matter more than winning by unfair means. Small acts, like helping a lost child find home during a campaign walk or correcting an opponent who misrepresented a fact, made people trust him even more. Through losses and wins, laughter and tears, Abraham Lincoln built a strong foundation for his future. Every village visit, every speech, and every honest conversation prepared him for the even bigger challenge ahead, leading a divided nation through its darkest times. By the end of this chapter, Honest Abe was no longer just a lawyer or a storyteller. He was a man learning how to guide people, one small step at a time. Chapter 10. A Nation Divided and a Leader Who Wanted Peace. By the mid-1850s, the United States was changing fast. Abraham Lincoln watched as small disagreements grew into deep divisions. The country was divided over slavery. Friends and neighbors argued. Families even split into two sides. Abraham felt a heavy weight in his heart. He wanted peace more than anything. He knew the country could be strong only if everyone worked together. Abraham spoke carefully in meetings and courts. He traveled long miles to listen to farmers, shopkeepers, and teachers. They spoke of fear and uncertainty. What will happen if the country splits? People asked. Abraham would nod, writing notes and telling simple stories. If we do not try to understand each other, the darkness grows, he said gently. His calm voice and honest eyes made people think. Even those who disagreed listened. He started giving speeches about unity and fairness. In small towns, he would stand on wooden platforms, hands holding simple notes, and tell stories of common people. Imagine a family that cannot eat together because they fight. That is what a country divided feels like, he would say. People nodded quietly, feeling the truth. He did not shout or threaten. He used words that touched hearts. As tensions rose, Abraham faced challenges from powerful politicians. Some wanted war immediately. Others wanted compromise at any cost. Abraham carefully considered each choice. He held long meetings, sometimes walking alone at night in forests to think. Once, after speaking to a group of farmers about compromise, a man came forward and said, "You are patient and calm, sir, but the world is impatient." Abraham smiled softly. Patience is a small tool, but it shapes strong bridges, he replied. Even at home, Abraham carried worries. Letters from friends, neighbors, and relatives filled his desk. Some were fearful, some angry. Every letter he read with care. He would answer with gentle words, encouraging people to think before acting. During this time, he also learned the power of listening. A small conversation with a child, a short story from a farmer, or a question from a teacher could guide his thinking as much as meetings with lawmakers. Abraham's journey in politics was now about more than winning votes. It was about guiding a divided nation toward hope and unity. Every village visit, every speech, every small act of kindness or honesty became a step on the long road toward peace. He knew the journey would be difficult and that dark clouds of conflict were coming, but his heart stayed firm, believing that truth, fairness, and patience could light a path even in the darkest storm. By the end of this chapter, Honest Abe was no longer just a storyteller or lawyer. He was a man learning how to hold the heart of a nation in his hands, preparing for a challenge that would test every lesson he had learned in life. Chapter 11. The long, difficult days of leadership. Abraham Lincoln became president at a time when the country's heart was heavy. The states were divided, and many people feared war. Every morning, Abraham woke early, often before sunrise. He would read letters, study maps, and listen to reports. The room was quiet, except for the crackle of fire or the scratch of his pen. Sometimes he paused, looking out of the window at the white snow or green fields, thinking of the families who were scared and hungry. The weight of the nation rested on his shoulders. Soldiers wrote to him from the front lines, asking for help. Mothers and fathers sent letters pleading for peace. Abraham read each carefully and answered with calm words. He often walked alone in the gardens or corridors of the White House, thinking of what each decision might cost in lives and hope. A soldier once told him, "Sir, we fear the worst." Abraham nodded, placing a hand gently on the soldier's shoulder. "We will find the path together," he said softly. Every day brought challenges. Cabinet meetings lasted hours. Ministers argued loudly. Abraham listened quietly, sometimes interrupting with a simple story to remind them of fairness and patience. One evening, after a long argument about supplies for soldiers, he brought a small map and traced a simple route for better distribution. Everyone paused, realizing his careful thinking had found a solution. Even his opponents respected the quiet wisdom he carried. At night, Abraham often worked by candlelight. He wrote letters to generals, giving careful instructions. He read reports from towns where battles had happened, noting small details like which villages had food or which rivers were difficult to cross. Every small fact mattered to him. He believed that every citizen, soldier, and worker deserved fairness and protection. Once, a young clerk handed him a bundle of letters. Abraham read each, smiled at the children's drawings, and responded personally. Even at home, Abraham felt the burden. Nights were long, and sleep came in short bursts. Mary, his wife, watched him carefully. She understood the weight he carried, but never interrupted. Sometimes he would tell small jokes to lighten the mood, making Mary and the children laugh quietly. These moments reminded him that even in the darkest days, small joys could be found. Through every challenge, Abraham stayed calm. He knew that decisions made in anger or haste could destroy the nation. Step by step, day by day, he guided the country. Every small choice, every kind word, and every careful plan became a thread holding the divided nation together. By the end of each long day, Abraham was tired, but his heart remained strong, believing that hope, honesty, and patience could guide the United States through its darkest hours. Chapter 12. Hope, Decisions, and a Vision for a Kinder Future. Abraham Lincoln knew that the country could not survive with only fear and anger. He wanted people to see hope even in dark times. Each morning, he read letters from citizens, soldiers, and teachers, Some letters were full of worry, others full of hope. He kept them all in careful piles, reading each with attention. He believed every small voice mattered. Once, a young girl wrote, asking if the war would ever end. Abraham smiled and replied gently, "We are building a better tomorrow, one day at a time." Every decision Abraham made was heavy, but he tried to think about fairness first. He visited hospitals where wounded soldiers lay quietly. Some cried, some whispered names of loved ones. Abraham held their hands, listened to their stories, and promised that the country would not forget them. Nurses and doctors were surprised to see a president move quietly among the beds, asking small questions, offering small comforts. He believed that even the smallest act of kindness could inspire courage. Abraham also spent time with his advisors, discussing plans for the future. He wanted education for every child, jobs for workers, and fairness for farmers. He drew simple maps and diagrams, explaining his ideas in plain words so everyone could understand. A nation grows not only with laws, but with hearts, he said during one meeting. His team started seeing beyond battles, imagining schools, bridges, and towns where children could play safely. On quiet evenings, Abraham would walk in the gardens of the White House. He often stopped under a tree, looking at the stars. He thought about freedom and equality, imagining a land where everyone could live without fear. Sometimes he whispered to himself, "We will heal this land, step by step, day by day." Birds chirped in the trees, and the wind seemed to carry a promise of better days. He also believed in listening. Once, a farmer came to see him with a small problem about taxes. Instead of dismissing it, Abraham asked questions, wrote notes, and promised to find a solution. The farmer left feeling heard, and Abraham felt hope grow in his own heart. He knew that small decisions mattered as much as big speeches. Through every long day, Abraham balanced hope and responsibility. He understood that a kinder future would not arrive by chance. It required careful planning, patience, and courage. Even in the midst of war, he encouraged teachers to keep schools open, families to help neighbors, and communities to stay together. He sent messages reminding people that the country was more than battles. It was about dreams, values, and hearts united. By the end of each day, Abraham felt tired but encouraged. He knew that his vision, supported by small, thoughtful acts, could guide the nation toward peace. Hope, he believed, was built slowly, but it could grow strong, like a tree planted in fertile soil. With every letter answered, every hospital visited, and every meeting held with care, Abraham Lincoln kept planting the seeds of a kinder, stronger, and more united future. Chapter 13. A second term, filled with new plans and gentle wisdom. When Abraham Lincoln began his second term as president, the country had already seen many hard days. War had taken many lives, and families still lived in fear. But Abraham remained calm. Each morning, he read letters from soldiers, teachers, and citizens. Some were full of hope, some of sorrow. He kept every letter carefully, knowing that behind each word was a person who mattered. Once, a young boy wrote asking when peace would come. Abraham folded the letter gently, smiled, and wrote back, "We are walking step by step toward better days." Abraham also spent long hours with his advisors. They discussed plans for rebuilding the country and helping people who had lost their homes or jobs. He made sure every voice was heard, even small voices from villages far away. He drew simple charts and wrote clear notes so that everyone could understand the plans. "We must act with fairness and care," he said. "A nation is not only built with laws, but with hearts." His team started seeing a future where children could return to school, families could farm their lands, and towns could grow safely. Even in the White House, Abraham moved quietly among his staff. He would stop to ask a secretary about her family, or to encourage a young clerk learning new tasks. He believed small kindnesses mattered. One evening, he noticed a janitor fixing a broken door. Abraham bent down, offered a hand, and asked if he needed help. The janitor was surprised, but felt appreciated. Abraham said softly, "Every work, big or small, helps the nation grow." He also took time to visit hospitals and soldiers. Some soldiers were tired, scared, or lonely. Abraham walked quietly through the rows of beds, holding their hands, listening to their stories, and offering words of hope. Nurses and doctors marveled at his calm presence. He believed that each small act of care could give courage to someone who felt weak. Even in his heavy responsibilities, he found time for these moments, knowing they inspired hope and trust. Abraham also wrote letters to encourage teachers, farmers, and workers. He asked schools to remain open, told families to help each other, and reminded communities to stay united. He often walked alone in the garden at night, thinking about the future. Stars shone brightly, and he whispered to himself, "Every small effort builds a stronger, kinder nation." He planted seeds of fairness, honesty, and care in every step he took. By the end of the day, he felt tired but hopeful. Abraham knew that lasting change came slowly, one thoughtful decision at a time. With his guidance, the nation began to see the possibility of peace and healing. Small acts, careful planning, and gentle wisdom. These were the tools he used to lead. People began to trust not only the president, but the values he lived. They saw that even during the hardest times, a calm heart and steady hands could guide a nation toward a brighter future. Chapter 14. The final days filled with warmth, stories, and quiet thoughts. As Abraham Lincoln's second term moved forward, the country slowly began to heal. The war was ending, and families looked forward to peace. Yet Abraham's days remained full of work. He spent hours reading reports, signing letters, and meeting advisors. But amid all the pressure, he always found small moments of calm. Each morning, he walked quietly in the White House garden. The cold air touched his face, and he watched birds land on branches. Sometimes he bent down to look at a flower, or spoke softly to a passing dog. These small moments helped him gather strength for the long days ahead. Abraham also spent time with friends, telling small stories that made people laugh. He had a gentle smile and a quiet sense of humor. One evening, he shared a funny tale about a stubborn mule on his farm from years ago, and the room erupted in soft laughter. Even soldiers and staff, exhausted from weeks of work, smiled and felt hope. These stories were not only jokes, they were lessons about patience, honesty, and simple human kindness. Abraham believed that even leaders needed to laugh and share warmth with those around them. At home, he cherished moments with Mary and his children. He walked with them, talked about small things like a bird in the garden, or watched them play quietly in the yard. He often paused to listen to their laughter or answer questions about the stars. Abraham loved these times because they reminded him why he worked so hard. For a peaceful and safe nation where children could grow freely. Sometimes he wrote little letters to family members far away, sending words of love and comfort. He believed that even a short note could carry hope and encouragement. He continued visiting veterans, hospitals, and towns around the capital whenever possible. Soldiers who had seen battles remembered him not just as a president, but as a man who cared. He would shake their hands, ask about their families, and offer a quiet word of encouragement. Nurses noticed how carefully he spoke to patients, how he bent to meet their eyes, and how he smiled gently. Even small gestures, like offering bread to a hungry child or listening patiently to a worried mother, carried deep meaning. These actions spread hope and trust. Even in his final days, Abraham reflected deeply. He wrote quietly by candlelight, thinking about the future and the nation's healing. He believed every decision, no matter how small, could shape generations. He often whispered to himself, "The work is not done, but every kind act, every honest word, every thoughtful plan will light the path forward." His calm and gentle wisdom inspired those around him to continue the work he had begun. Abraham Lincoln's last days were filled with ordinary moments of love, small gestures of care, and quiet thoughts about a nation he had guided through its darkest times. He showed that leadership was not only in speeches or laws, but also in everyday acts of patience, understanding, and warmth. People remembered him not just as a president, but as a man who lived with a heart full of kindness, a mind full of wisdom, and hands ready to help. Chapter 15. A legacy that continues to guide the world. Even after Abraham Lincoln's life ended, his presence remained in every corner of the country. People remembered him not only for his speeches or his decisions, but for the simple, kind acts he had done every day. Children in schools learned how he loved books, how he walked miles to return lost coins, and how he told stories that made everyone laugh. Families told tales of a president who listened, smiled, and cared about every citizen, no matter how small. His famous speeches, like the Gettysburg Address, were read slowly in classrooms and towns. Teachers pointed out that even in short sentences, Abraham spoke truth, honesty, and hope. People who had never met him felt inspired to act kindly in their own lives. Citizens began to plant trees, care for the poor, and teach their children about patience and fairness, all lessons learned from the quiet strength of Abraham Lincoln. Statues, memorials, and books were made in his honor, but the real memory lived in small actions. When someone helped a neighbor, shared bread, or guided a lost child, it echoed the lessons Abraham had quietly shown. In towns and villages, people still spoke of Honest Abe, a man who believed that even one kind act could change the world. Leaders around the globe studied his words and decisions. They learned how a calm mind and a caring heart could guide nations through storms. Abraham's vision of equality, peace, and fairness inspired movements for freedom, education, and justice in many countries. Letters, journals, and diaries from those who had met him were preserved, showing the warmth of his smile, the honesty in his voice, and the quiet wisdom in his eyes. Even today, when citizens face hard times, they recall his teachings: patience in struggle, courage in fear, and kindness in power. Every time a community comes together to help each other, every time someone speaks truth with honesty, Abraham Lincoln's spirit lives on. The boy from a log cabin, the reader by the firelight, the young clerk telling stories, the leader of a divided nation. All parts of him continue to guide the world. Abraham Lincoln's life is proof that greatness is not only in power or wealth, but in small acts of honesty, courage, and love. His legacy teaches that one person with patience, wisdom, and care can shape a nation and inspire generations. The world continues to look up to him, remembering a man who walked humbly, spoke wisely, and led with a heart full of hope. Like this story, if you love history and honesty, comment your favorite lesson from Abraham Lincoln's life. Share this story with friends to inspire them too. Subscribe to Glorious English for more real-life stories in simple English. Hit the bell icon to watch all chapters of inspiring leaders.